And you're live.
Hi, everybody. Coming to you on Tuesday night, election night in Virginia. This is one of these moments that, had we said a year ago this was going to happen, people would have thought, we were insane. First, the big news is Virginia has passed this. It's frankly closer than I thought it was going to be. I thought it was going to win by a bigger margin, considering that the incumbent, the current Democrat governor had won by close to 10 points, and this race is going to be closer, which I think is interesting. Let's back up on how we got here. We got here because Donald Trump and Republicans thought they're going to lose in November. And so what's happened now with my former party, instead of trying to win more votes, they've decided to try to curate the vote and pick the voters. Now, in many ways, this is just an extension of what happened when the African-American support of the party collapsed in 1964. The party, so just to back up there, 1956, Eisenhower got almost 40% of the black vote. It fell off a cliff when Goldwater opposed the Civil Rights Act, down to 7%. Last November in the Virginia governor's race, the Republican nominee for governor, who was African-American, got 7%. Pretty much a flat line. That's 58 years, something. And that really goes to the heart of how we failed in the party. We had this choice. We had to ask ourselves, why is it that a certain segment of voters out there are overwhelmingly against us? I mean, 90+%. And these are African-American voters. And when I worked for Governor Bush and President Bush, we failed at this too. But at least we thought it was a failure. And we admitted it was a failure. And we tried to do more. And ultimately, voting, I think, is sort of the perfect marketplace. People vote for what they can vote for anybody, and they vote for what they want to vote for. Which is why this nonsense that Donald Trump hijacked the Republican Party. He didn't hijack the party. The hijacker is never popular on the plane. Nobody's sitting there going, oh, great, we get to go to Cuba, not to grandma's. No. And Donald Trump was wildly popular. So the party failed and became an increasingly white party in a country that is becoming a minority-majority party. And that failure is ultimately the same instinct carried to another level that Donald Trump has and Republicans have now, so many of them, when they try to curate the election. The ultimate curation is to say, I won the 2020 election, even though I lost by millions and millions of votes. When you can curate truth, you can curate an election. When you can curate facts, you can curate an election. So Trump, he's sitting around. They said, we're going to lose. We got a bunch of yahoos in Texas. They'll do anything we say. So let's push redistricting to Texas. And that's going to give us a bunch of extra votes, a bunch of extra seats, and that'll be a cushion. Which was all working great until, it didn't work. And, say what you will about Gavin Newsom in California. He had the right idea. He said, nope. Nobody changes the rules in the middle of a game unless they're losing. But if you're going to change the rules, we're going to play by those rules. So we're going to do it in California. And guess what? California is bigger than Texas. So they passed and we said, but we're going to do it by vote. They passed a referendum. And it actually passed by a larger margin than Virginia. And then Democrat governor got elected. He says, we're going to do it in Virginia. And it kind of goes to one of the things that I used to always, warn clients about, the law of unintended consequences. It's that point that I always like to remind clients that, Custer was looking for Sitting Bull. So sometimes these things don't work out like you think they are. So I think it's a big night, because had they won, they being Republicans, it would have been a really bad night. But let's look at some of these numbers because they're surprising to me in some ways. First, I'm looking at the New York Times here, and the latest numbers are what, 51.4 to 48.6. I thought it would be higher. And you can look geographically, Fairfax County, suburban, DC. Yes, by 39 points. 39 points. I mean, that's why this thing won, because there's a lot of humans up there. And Doge was like a Freddy Krueger movie to the workforce in Virginia, many of whom are very dedicated civil servants, people who work for the government. And, a lot of people who work for the government do it because they actually believe in what they're doing and they care about it. And, Elon Musk, this, ketamine lunatic, went in there and did Doge, which I think was incredibly illegal. And one of the tests, you get a Democrat House, Democratic Senate, Democrat president, is you have to go in and prosecute what happened under Doge. It was completely illegal. And don't go after just these, little frat nerds who did it. You should go after Elon Musk. You should try to prosecute Elon Musk. And they were stealing Social Security data, which is illegal in any state. So Donald Trump can go and pardon all these boys and girls. And it's not going to matter if state attorney generals go after them. And that's kind of what happened here, where you had a state movement to go after, to change this redistricting. So Fairfax County, not close. Virginia Beach. Now that's interesting because when I worked for presidential candidates, and that's the only way I worked in Virginia. I never worked for a governor candidate in Virginia or a Senate candidate in Virginia. But Virginia Beach was an area that if you were a Republican and you weren't winning Virginia Beach by a nice margin, it was probably going to be a bad night. So this failed in Virginia Beach, but only by 1.1 points. So basically it was a tie. So keep going. You go to Prince William County, another suburban, 26 points. Richmond City, 65%. So that gets to the demographics beyond geography. So you had candidates, the way the Times break this down is kind of interesting. It's a little weird. It's not how I would do it, but they do it. They're saying those areas that had more black residents, it passed by 32%. Those that had more white residents, it passed by 0.26. So it barely passed. And this is interesting. Those that had more Hispanic residents, it passed by 26 points. So, after this 24 election, there was a lot of nonsense. It was a realignment election. So, I just thought it was madness when you looked at the facts. In 2020, Donald Trump's coalition was 85% white. Okay, he did a little bit better 4 years later. It was 84% white. I don't think I'd start working about a whole, complete realignment of American politics if you're celebrating that now you're only losing African Americans by 88% instead of 94%. I don't know. That seems a little weird to me. You're only losing Asian Americans by 68%. So they did better with Hispanics, though. In Bush world, we got up to about 44%. But this was something that then Governor Bush cared about very deeply. There is a whole different culture in Texas, Tex-Mex culture. There's so many families that are, have a Mexican father-in-law, or mother-in-law. There's just so much of that the vote in Texas has, by Hispanic versus non-Hispanic, has been less segmented than it has in other places like California, which is an interesting story, something probably to talk about another day. But if you go back to 1994, Pete Wilson was running for re-election of governor of California. He ran this infamous ad of Mexican Americans supposedly, or Mexicans supposedly, people without papers, crawling over the border with this sort of Darth Vader voice, they keep coming. And since then, it's been almost impossible for a Republican to win statewide. George Bush ran in 94 in a very welcoming campaign for Hispanics. He believed in it. It was something that, we talk a lot about authenticity in politics. I don't think we really talked about it back then in 94, but it really came across as authentic. And as a little side testament to that is, 1999, I got hired to do the Bush campaign for president. He was in governor. So I got down to Austin, spring of 1999. First thing I ever filmed for then Governor Bush was opening a bridge between Mexico and the United States. A fucking bridge, not a wall. And I remember this vividly because I wandered off to shoot some B-roll and I missed the deadline for the motorcade to leave, and they left me in Mexico. And I called back in Austin and I said, guys, what the fuck? And they're like, yeah, you'll find your way here. Lots of people do it. So lesson to that, don't be late for the motorcade. But it just shows the difference in what it meant to be a Republican. I mean, Bush thought this was incredibly important. The first ad that we ever ran in the Bush campaign, people, to the extent anybody ever noticed this, they certainly don't talk about it. But we ran the first paid advertisement in the 2000 Bush for President campaign was a Hispanic radio ad on Hispanic radio in Iowa. Now, did we think that there was some massive hidden vote in the Iowa caucus that we could get out there? No, we didn't. We're not idiots. But we thought it was really important to send a message that even in the Iowa caucus, which is, about as white as the hockey finals in the Olympics, it was still important to send a message that this was something that the governor to be president cared about. So when we got up to 44% of the vote in 2004. So Trump did better with Hispanics. He got up to about 43%. And there was a sense that there had been some realignment. But no, his support was always economically driven. And, the Hispanic vote is a weird thing because it is a self-described demographic in the census. You decide if you're Hispanic or not. And it's interesting. It floats up and down. And at a certain point, there's sort of a variation of those who are Hispanic but speak English at home. And Republicans always did better at that. In the Romney campaign, he actually won Hispanics, where if they speak English at home. But at a certain point, it's when do you quit seeing yourself as Hispanic? When I first started working in Massachusetts in 1990 for the governor's race for Bill Well, we would test Italian Americans. And then, I don't know, at some point we quit because the fact that they were voting wasn't being driven by the fact that they had an Italian American heritage any more than being Irish American. They were being driven. Those Italian Americans that had a certain demographic, socioeconomic status were voting different than those who didn't. It wasn't being driven by their ethnic heritage. And that happens with the Spanish. It's ultimately the melting pot of America. That's sort of the goal. So anyway, Hispanic numbers are a little funky when you look at them. Unlike, say, African Americans, because people, are you African American or not? Most people can answer that question. And they don't change. There's a documented history that people will say that they're Hispanic at one point in their life and they'll say they're not at another, which is how they see themselves. But anyway, there was an impossibility that the Trump Hispanic coalition would survive because you had these two forces. Stephen Miller, let's create the largest paramilitary force outside of the army in the history of America, put them in mask, give them battle rattle like they're stepping beyond the green line in Iraq, and have them chase brown people all over the country. And by the way, shoot people in the face or on the sidewalk if they try to protest. Were Hispanics like that? No, it was obvious. And the thing is, you can imagine, there's a disproportionate number of Hispanics, particularly males, who work in the construction industry. And the construction industry was really doing badly for a while during the Biden years. So there was, I think, a legitimately economically driven desire for let's try something different, a vote for change, voted for Trump. Then they turn on their televisions and they see, you know, other brown people, relatives, neighbors, friends, or people they don't know but have some sympathy for, getting chased around by these largely fat white guys who can't even run, who like bounce around with automatic weapons. It's like, no, that's not what I voted for. So when you see something like this of the redistricting being overwhelmingly supported by Hispanics, that's like a very interesting indicator that what happened in 24 was just an aberration and will not be repeated. As was the case in the Virginia governor's race, where Hispanic support for the Republican candidate dropped to about 31%, which is sort of the norm. You know, McCain got about 31%, Romney got about 31%. And same happened in New Jersey, elected a Democratic governor, about 31, 32%. So I think there's sort of a reverting to the mean here. So in the big picture, let's just sort of step back. You know, we've had two very interesting elections here, one in Hungary and one here. And am I going to be crazy enough to try to link a vote in Hungary to a redistricting vote in Virginia and go, yeah, I think I am. Because I think that they both indicate a rejection of the inevitability of democratic decline. Decline is a choice, which is something, you know, a phrase we used to use back in the Reagan days. And we would attack Jimmy Carter and his malaise, and, you know, that America had to be a place of limits. And we go, no, decline is a choice. I think a lot of what we said turned out to be complete bullshit, because you get Bill Clinton elected president and you have the largest economic growth in the history of the country. So that was a choice to vote Democratic, and, you know, it resulted in largest expansion of wealth in the history of the country in that short period of time. And one of the big subjects in the 2000 presidential debate was what to do with the surplus. Can you imagine? Pull up transcripts of the Bush-Gore debates. The word terrorism was never mentioned. You know, we're in a war of terror a year later. It was never mentioned in 3 debates. But there's a lot of talk about what to do with the surplus. It reads like an artifact from a lost civilization. So I think if you study, and if you read those who have studied, and it is a deeply studied topic by brilliant people of the rise of autocracy and how democracies fall into autocracy, there is always an element that the autocrats convince the other side that their cause is hopeless, that there's nothing we can do. And what happened, if you look at what happened in Hungary, and you got to wrap your mind, I was in Hungary, it was an election that would have been like the dream conditions of what Trump is trying to do. The opposition against Orban was very limited in any advertising they could buy. They were very limited where they could put up billboards. They couldn't buy radio places. They couldn't buy television. There were places where it was very hard for them to get permits to campaign. This was a state-controlled election. And yet Orban was humiliated. And, you know, I wrote a piece for Lincoln Square, which I really hope you'll read. I guess it came out this morning, comparing the weekend that I was in Berlin filming when the Berlin Wall came down. And the scenes there of, you know, just total joy and strangers hugging strangers and the sense of possibility that the world was a brighter place than we had dared hope a week before. And when I looked at the images out of Budapest, I had that same feeling that they had done something that they thought might be impossible, and they had proved to themselves that they were, that there was no inevitability to the decline of democracy. And I would say Virginians have done the same here. And in a macro sense, if you're a Democratic candidate for president, and there's going to be a bunch of good ones, what is the lesson? The lesson is to fight. That is what people are drawn to. And let's go back to Gavin Newsom. After the 24 election, Gavin Newsom, who's not a bad politician, he thought the smart thing to do was to tack right. And he had Charlie Kirk and Steve Bannon on his podcast. And what did Democrats do? They kind of threw up on his shoes and said, like, have you lost your fucking mind? And Newsom, not a bad politician, did what not bad politicians do. He adjusted. And then he started mocking Trump. And he's been rewarded for that. Same with the governor of Illinois. Standing up to Donald Trump is what the voters want. And that has to be played out. And I believe that one of the central issues in the Democratic primary process should be, needs to be, an articulation of the dedication and the mechanics of how you're going to prosecute the criminality of the Trump administration. If Stephen Miller is not on trial after Democrats win, Democrats have failed. If he's not indicted, if Kristi Noem is not indicted, if individual ICE agents are not exposed, put on a public list, those that can be proven to have acted illegally should be prosecuted. It's got to be at the top. And, you know, you could make a case that all that would happen after Trump is if we had a reversion to normalcy, people would be so grateful for that they would reward it. The problem is that's what happened with Joe Biden. And it wasn't enough. And the system failed to hold Trump accountable. And now, you know, these thugs are all over the government, like Kash Patel. They're rooting out the dedicated FBI agents who followed the law, which kind of really rings true with me because my dad was an FBI agent. And the Justice Department, they've turned into like trying to turn it into like one of these non-functional Trump lawyer firms that will go and represent Trump. So you have the guys now basically, he is the acting attorney general of the United States, gets on a plane and flies down to Florida to spend 2 days talking to the largest, the most notorious convicted pedophile of our time, probably the most notorious convicted pedophile in history, to get her into a club fed. Think about that. Our Justice Department, Todd Blanche, got a pedophile from a real prison in a club fed where she can have yoga lessons and a pet, even though having a sex offender in that facility goes against the Prison Bureau guidelines. That's what happened to the Republican Party. Talk to me about family values, guys. Really. Really. So this is hopeful. I think it's encouraging. And, you know, I just say to Democrats and to all of us, this is a time to stay angry. We have a lot to be angry about. We should be in the remember and do not forgive mode until this country is put back on track, and hold those responsible. So thanks. Subscribe to Lincoln Square. If you're able to pay for it, that's great. One of the parallels between what happened in Hungary and what they're trying to do here is the domination of the media. And we've seen great independent media titans fall. The Washington Post is now just a sad shell. CBS, with this ridiculous woman running it, a woman who's not, almost never been a journalist, who it's another whole thing, but I mean, it's just a disgrace. And no one's going to save us except ourselves. And the rise of independent media like Lincoln Square is hugely positive, and you've made it possible. So thanks. Feel better about the universe tonight, and wake up tomorrow and fight. All the best.